The movie opens in Chicago. Hank Palmer is in the bathroom at the courthouse, when the prosecuting attorney Mike Catan questions his ethics, and being one of the best defense attorneys in the city, he defends so many guilty people. Catan asks how he sleeps at night. Hank tells him, he sleeps in a beautiful house with a loving wife. Hank tells him that innocent people can't afford him. In the courtroom, Hank gets a phone call from his brother telling him that their mother died. Hank requests that the trial be postponed until he can return. Catan doesn't believe him, so Hank plays the voicemail to the judge, and he agrees. Outside Hank's house, Hank bonds with his daughter Lauren. She wants to come along to meet his family, but he refuses, telling it's not a pleasant place. He goes inside and tells his wife that he wants custody of Lauren once they're divorced. The happy life he painted for Catan isn't exactly the truth. His wife argues, telling he'd be a horrible father because he doesn't know when Lauren gets up for school, who her teachers are, what her favorite color is. Hank angrily reminds her she is the one who cheated, and leaves for the airport. His memory flashes a car accident from his past which seems affected his life. Hank reaches his hometown, Carlinville, Indiana, for his mother's funeral. Hank pays his respects to his mom at the funeral home viewing, where he meets his younger brother Dale, who seems to be autistic and hides behind a camera filming everything. He also meets his oldest brother Glenn, who owns a tire shop. Hank goes to the local courthouse and watches his dad, Judge Joseph Palmer, deliberate over a case where a guy says he can't afford child support even though he just bought a new truck. Judge Palmer dispenses small-town justice, and orders the man give his truck keys over to the pregnant woman suing him, so that she can sell it. The judge also points out that she's responsible too. At the end of the case, Judge Palmer struggles to remember bailiff Gus's name, as his memory is fading. The judge returns home to find people waiting for him to give condolences, and he notices Hank but disregards him. Hank walks to him and they reluctantly exchange greetings. He discovers that his dad stores all of his junk in his old room, and no one made preparations for him to stay. The next morning, Hank drives to a diner where all his family were having breakfast, and was angry for not inviting him. The judge gets up and leaves without really acknowledging Hank at all. Hank sees that his old high school girlfriend Samantha works at the diner. They haven't seen each other in years. At his mom's funeral, the judge is warm and friendly to everyone except Hank. They don't get along at all. They go to the cemetery and bury the mom. That night, the judge informs them he is going to the convenience store, and the brothers decide to go to a local bar. At the bar, a local starts talking trash about the judge, because they've all had poor experiences in the judge's courtroom. Glenn is about to fight them, but Hank steps in and through fast talking shames the locals into leaving. This impresses the young bartender Carla, and she makes out with Hank later that night. The next morning, Hank notices Judge's Cadillac has the right front headlight and fender damaged. Glenn tries to fix it and wonders what he might have hit. The judge sees it and yells at them for damaging his car, but Hank reminds he is the one who drove last night. Hank accuses his father of driving intoxicated, prompting his father to reveal his failing marriage to his brothers, and he angrily leaves telling he will never return. After boarding the flight, he gets a call from Glenn, telling their dad was called down to the police station to question about the damage to the car, and they found a body. The judge goes with the police for questioning. They ask the judge about his whereabouts the night before, as they have witness that puts his car on the route at the time of the accident. But Hank steps in and stops things. The police say they are impounding the judge's vehicle. On their way back, Hank asks again if he was intoxicated, as he got drinking problems in the past. But the judge says he can't remember and denies hitting anybody, and assures him he is sober. The next morning, cops inform Hank that they found traces of victims' blood in his dad's car. They say it's murder too, as the victim is Mark Blackwell, with whom the judge had a past. The judge got arrested, but eventually bailed out by Hank. We learn that Blackwell had a girlfriend, and one day he took a gun to her place and shot her place up. The judge went easy on him as he wept like a lost child and said he was drunk and would never do it again. The judge believed him and gave him the minimum jail sentence of 30 days. Upon his release, Blackwell drugged his girlfriend and drowned her behind her house, killing her. The judge sentenced him to 20 years. The judge says if the blood matches, he must have killed Blackwell, as he doesn't remember any of that. The judge refuses to let Hank represent him and instead hires local inexperienced attorney C.P. Kennedy. Lawyering seems to be a side job to Kennedy running a shop. They find out that Dwight Dickham is going to be handling the prosecution. Kennedy's defense proves ineffective in the preliminary hearing, and Hank shows his frustration on him before he was ordered to leave the courthouse. Later the judge announces the case is going for trial. The next morning, the judge informs Kennedy stepped down, as he thought his inexperience will cost the case. Hank then asks what was he doing on that road, as it's not the route for home from the store. The judge tells him the road home was washed out and he turned around after going some further, and after that he was missing time. He finally agrees to let Hank represent him. Hank asks Dale about the judge's condition. Dale says that he's fine and keeps a routine where he goes and plays chess with Dr. Morris every week. Hank remembers his dad doesn't play chess, so he asks if Dale has any footage, which he does, and they look at the film and we find out that the judge is getting some sort of medical treatment. Hank tells the judge that he knows about the chemo and wants to use that in court. The judge's pride prevents him from wanting to use being sick as a defense. No one, aside from the doctor and the late wife, knows about the cancer. He says that people don't remember any of the great stuff Ronald Reagan did. They only remember him as a senile old man with Alzheimer. He doesn't want that to be his legacy too. Hank points out that he's just a small town judge and he'll have no legacy. The judge wants to take the stand during his case, but Hank doesn't want him to. The judge says that only guilty people refuse to defend themselves. Hank breaks out his old Metallica shirt and bike and starts riding around town. He rides no-handed on his bike, and wipes out. Samantha finds him and offers him a ride. It turns out Carla is her daughter, and their stories clash regarding whether they've met or not, with Carla being honest and he's not. At the courthouse, Kennedy is now assisting Hank and sticks around to pick the jury, and Hank asks what kind of bumper sticker each candidate has on their car, and picks them only if he thinks he can persuade them. Since Hank is going to be in Indiana for a while, he has his daughter Lauren come to visit. He warns her that his father is a mean man and she shouldn't take it personally. Much to Hank's surprise, the judge is delightful to Lauren and tells her that she's the first girl they've had in the family in a very long time. Hank and Samantha hang out and catch up a little. They break into the diner like they did as kids, and then she tells him that she doesn't just work there, she owns it now. They didn't have to break in, she wanted to because it was just like old times, and it was worth a broken window to see Hank climb the building. Later, she comes onto him, but he rejects her advances and explains that he's going back to Chicago as soon as he can. She's insulted that he thinks she wanted anything more than just a hookup and tells him to lock up when he leaves. Hank meets with Doc Morris, and finds out that they caught it too late, and he is missing time due to chemotherapy. That night, Hank and Lauren are having dinner, and hear a noise from the judge's room. Hank goes to investigate and sees that his dad is out of it, struggling to walk and has soiled himself. Hank takes him into the bathroom, undresses him and helps him in the shower to clean him off. Hank takes his daughter to the airport to go home and notices that she has a lot of the same mannerisms that Carla has. He goes home and checks dates for homecoming and realizes that Carla was born 9 months after the last night he spent with Samantha. He thinks Carla might be his daughter. At the trial, Dickham uses all the evidence and confession to prove the judge guilty, while Hank uses all his wits to defend him. That night, they talk about the best lawyers they've ever seen. Hank tells the judge about one he respected, and the judge tells Hank about one who had integrity, clearly something he feels his son lacks. The next morning, Hank was called to the police station. They show him a security tape that shows that the judge lied about his trip home. He said he went one direction, saw that the road was washed out and went back the other way. The security tape shows that his timeline doesn't match up. One day, all the family gather and Dale plays a reel of when they were all kids, playing with their mother and father. Then we see young Glenn, and he used to be the local star baseball player, but his career was sidelined by a car accident. The judge gets enraged and kicks away the projector. Hank and the judge have a huge fight. It turns out Hank was driving under the influence the night Glenn got in the car accident and got injured, which costed his brother's career. Hank argues he was always hard on him, as they sent him to juvenile detention even though he prosecutor recommended community service, but the judge points out because of that Hank turned out fine. Hank says he turned out fine on his own. The judge reminds him that he's the one who paid for Hank to go to law school and become a lawyer. Hank graduated at the top of his class and never got a congratulation from his dad. In all fairness, Hank also never thanked his dad. This visit to Carlinville is the first time they've spoken since Hank left home at 18. The next day at court, Dickham plays the footage where they were both at the convenience store. This triggers the judge's memory and he suddenly collapses. At the hospital, the judge admits to Hank that he killed Blackwell, but Hank doesn't believe him as it overrides his ethical superiority. Hank asks if he remembers hitting him, and the judge says it's a matter of time. Hank requests him to not take stand, as there is no witness and they can win. But the judge is determined to take stand, and Hank takes the assurance that he won't confess to something that he doesn't remember doing. Next day at the court, Hank asks if he remembers hitting him, and the judge doesn't. Later, Dickham cross-examines him, but the judge absolutely does not remember killing Blackwell. Dickham says he has no further questions, But the judge voluntarily testifies that while he doesn't remember killing Blackwell, he's glad he's dead. Later, Hank questions him and brings up the chemo, much to the surprise of everyone, even for Glenn and Dale. This infuriates the judge, who tells Hank that after this they're done forever. But Hank goes on to persuading that he is having delusions and memory loss because of the chemotherapy. The judge denies that, and Hank asks what does he remember. He reveals that Blackwell told him that since the judge's wife was buried in the same cemetery as the girl he killed years ago, now he can piss on both of their graves. Hank questions him why he initially went easy on Blackwell, and the judge replies he saw Hank in him. Later, Hank presents Gus, the bailiff working with the judge for 20 years. But he can't remember his name. Hank asks Samantha if Carla is his daughter. She finally reveals that she is Glenn's daughter. Samantha was mad that Hank ditched her, so she hooked up with his brother out of spite. Glenn doesn't know. He's married now and has 2 sons, so she never wanted to bother him with that. The jury comes back with a not guilty verdict to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. He's sentenced to 4 years in prison. Hank goes back to Chicago and runs into Catan in the bathroom again. He's a changed man. He's on a losing streak with cases and on the verge of losing his job, but he seems okay with it. 7 months later, the judge is released from prison. Hank picks him up. They go fishing. The judge tells him that before, when Hank asked him who the best lawyer he ever saw was, he was wrong. The best lawyer he ever saw was Hank. Hank finally gets his dad's approval. Then the judge dies in the fishing boat. After the judge's funeral, Hank goes into the courtroom where his dad sat for so many years. He spins his dad's chair, seemingly indicating he is the next judge. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to watch more videos like this.